So we're going to talk a little bit about Cazoomi and getting MailChimp and Constant Contact talking to Salesforce via Cazoomi. So let's talk a little bit about what your options are for Constant Contact and Cazoomi. Constant Contact doesn't have its own integration, so you're reliant on third-party middleware tools like Cazoomi. Zapier is also an option. And then, of course, there's the big, expensive, fancy tools that most nonprofits can't afford. You've got MuleSoft, Workato, Boomi. Those are also an option. On the MailChimp side, MailChimp does have a free MailChimp app that you can use to get the two talking. It is available on the App Exchange, and it is free. It's not one of those like free to download and then you have to sign up for a subscription. It is a free tool. It's been around for years and years and years. And then also the same middleware tools that are available for Constant Contact are available for MailChimp to get the two systems talking to each other. Now about the MailChimp integration app. It is available on the App Exchange. It is on the MailChimp's website. It's referred to as MailChimp for Salesforce, but on the App Exchange, it's MailChimp integration app. It is, I want to call a couple things out on this slide. One, it is free. The other thing I want to call out is the rating. This is not a very well-loved tool, and there are reasons for that. It works marvelously if you have very little segmentation needs. Starts falling apart once you want to start syncing different segments, having criteria of what contacts to send to what group, what tag. That's where MailChimp starts really falling apart. So if you have very simple needs just to get the two talking to each other, this tool can be amazing. So what it does, where it starts falling apart is if you have a new contact that you add into Salesforce and it meets all the criteria to hit a segment or a group, it will push that contact to MailChimp, add it to the tag, add it to the group, no problem. Where it starts falling apart is if you have maybe someone sign up for a newsletter, MailChimp adds them into MailChimp, but then later maybe they do something, maybe they donate, maybe they volunteer or sign a petition that should get them added to another tag or group. MailChimp on its regular sync cycle will look at that contact and say, hey, this one's already in MailChimp, I don't need to do anything with it. And so we'll not add it to those tags and groups. So now all of a sudden you have your tags and groups that are out of sync and you don't have accurate lists of who you're targeting with your emails. What you can do to get around that if you don't have really complex needs is taking advantage of MailChimp's custom fields. So if you create custom fields in MailChimp, you can sync fields from the contact to those custom fields in MailChimp and be able to create dynamic segments within MailChimp to create those type segments instead of relying on groups or tags. So for instance, if you have a current donor or a lapsed donor list, you can push the last donation date or maybe the donation total or the first donation date as a custom field into MailChimp and then use that to create a dynamic segment within MailChimp to create your lists. The MailChimp integration is one-way Salesforce to MailChimp. You can get it talking MailChimp to Salesforce, but you need to build some sort of automation because it will it creates leads. So unless you are one of those orgs that has an actual lead conversion process, you're just going to end up with a whole bunch of leads sitting in the background and not doing anything. So you'll need to build an automation to take that lead, look for an existing contact, connect them, or create a contact for that lead. It will sync your emails opt-outs from Salesforce to MailChimp, but not back in the other direction. Before I move on to Cazoomi, any specific questions about this free app? Okay, awesome. So let's dig into Cazoomi. Cazoomi recently reworked its various plans. So if you currently have Cazoomi, the various pages that we look at might look a little bit different because they reworked it, and the basic plan now includes a whole bunch of add-ons that you used to have to pay additional for. So the basic plan now does pretty much everything that you might be able to do except for a full sync, which we can get into later. One thing I want to call out on this plan comparison is this little tag at the bottom that they offer 50% discount for nonprofits and orgs. So their starting is $50 a month instead of $100 a month. And for a lot of organizations that are having to either manually export or keep track of a whole bunch of manual work with their lists in sync, this can be a very cost-effective way when you start really looking at how much time does it take for staff to get those two links in sync, or how much potential constituent communication are you losing out in because your two systems aren't talking to each other. So $50 a month when might seem like initial costs sticker shock, but when you really start looking at the time saving and what you're gaining from it, can really not be that big of a deal in the budget wise.
Hey, TJ, I have a really quick question on that. So Cazoomi, are they just selling an integration as a product, or do they also provide like a service with that as well? Like, we'll support and manage the integration, we can enhance it. Do you know that about Cazoomi, some of these offerings?
So it's the platform. You do get support, but the support is like, I'm having trouble configuring this, or I'm having an issue, it's not working as planned. They do have one-on-ones to help you get it configured properly, and a whole bunch of videos, but it's the platform itself that is built the way it's built, and they're always trying to improve on it. But they do have custom solutions if you look at the enterprise side of things, but that gets up into the very expensive range. But for the most part, it is the platform as is that you're just buying licensing for.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I did want to call out that while we're going to talk about Constant Contact and MailChimp, Cazoomi has several other integrations with Salesforce, 22 to be exact, one of which is Eventbrite. If anyone has Eventbrite and has tried to get Eventbrite talking to Salesforce, knows the frustrations there, especially since Eventbrite dumped their own integration, and I believe they recently brought it back. But they do have several other integrations with Salesforce. Just wanted to call that out. And they just rolled out some NPSP specific syncs that I will call out as we walk through the various configurations. So they realized that nonprofits use Salesforce different than the rest of the world, and there's two specific pieces of functionality that they have built out to support nonprofits using Cazoomi. So some of those main features in the basic plan is you can either set it up for a one-way sync or a true two-way sync. It syncs the opt-outs in both directions. You can sync specific fields from MailChimp to specific fields in Salesforce, vice versa. You can say, no, I only want it to go from Salesforce to MailChimp or MailChimp to Salesforce. You have the option of custom field mapping. So similar to the free app where you can map additional fields to the tool to then create dynamic segments within your email platform, it will allow that. And it will allow it in either direction. You can send it to Salesforce to MailChimp, MailChimp to Salesforce, or in both directions to, for the most recently edited. You can do filtering and segmentation. You can bring back campaign metrics of open clicks bounces as well as URLs clicked. You have the option to use a custom unsubscribe field if you use such a thing instead of the standard email opt-out checkbox on the contact. You can schedule the sync. And of course, the access to support is there, and their support is pretty good. I have not been let down by their support thus far. And then they have this new NPSP functionality. So this NPSP functionality the big one is around the email matching. If you are using the NPSP personal work alternate email with the preferred email functionality on the contact, this will check before creating a new contact from MailChimp to Salesforce. Usually it just creates it just looks at the standard Salesforce email field on the contact. Does that match? Great. If not, I'm going to create a new record. This now will check, does that preferred email match? If not, great. Let's check the personal work and alternate emails. And if that email is in there on a contact as a personal work or alternate that is not a preferred, it will not create a new record. So it reduces the amounts of duplicates that are created in Salesforce. The other option is to create an organization affiliation instead of an org account. So usually, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't mean to interrupt. I did have a question about the emails. That's exciting about the NPSP. This is the bane of my existence for many people, right? So all these platforms, we check the standard Salesforce email field, and then, well, wait, we have these others. And so are you saying here, maybe I misunderstood, so in regards to the two-way sync, if a record's created in MailChimp and it comes across the Salesforce side, it won't just make a decision based off the standard Salesforce email field. It will reference the work, the NPSP fields, work, alternative, personal, before it creates a new, and then it will match on any of those?
Yeah, it looks to see if that email exists in any of those fields. If it does, it will not create a new contact.
Great, and it'll.
What it won't do is it won't. What I haven't seen it do is actually match it to the contact where that is that email is on. So I haven't seen it add all of the activities and campaign member and opens and clicks to that contact. It just won't create a duplicate.
Okay, perfect. So it still is kind of reliant on the standard email field, but it is smart enough to check those NPSP fields as well. And like you said, not create duplicate records all over the place.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you.
And then, of course, the 50% nonprofit discount. And I want to call out, with this discount, there's not a form that you have to fill out or a process that you have to prove that you have a 501c3 or anything like that. If you create the trial account using an email with a .org, NGO, EDU, gov, and I think there's a couple more at the end of the domain name for that user, when you sign up for a paid plan, that discount will automatically be applied. When you're going through the process, you won't see that discount until the very last screen. So you might freak out. It's like, it's still saying $100 a month. You have to make it all the way through the process of entering all the payment information. And it's not until the very last screen that you see that discount. So if you're having a partner or a consultant or a freelancer configure this for you, it's best to have someone within your organization set up that trial and then either set up a user for them to access or give them the login information. It is possible, and we've had to do this several times, where the folks at the nonprofit just don't have the time, aren't available. So we will set up the trial, and then we'll just have to open a support ticket to get that nonprofit discount applied. So just know that if you're starting off with Cazoomi, it's best for someone within the organization to create that trial and then hand that off to your consultants to set it up. So that's, you don't have to open a support ticket to get that discount.
TJ, I've got another, this may not be nonprofit specific, but related to unsubscribes from MailChimp to Salesforce. I don't know if you mentioned this with the free app or with the Cazoomi apps, but do you know if they support integration related to unsubscribes?
So the MailChimp free app will sync the Salesforce email opt-out box to MailChimp to unsubscribe. Any unsubscribes in MailChimp will not make it back to Salesforce. Cazoomi has a two-way sync for that email opt-out field with unsubscribes. And you have the option to sync a non-standard email opt-out field.
Got it. Okay. Now that's important. I guess I would share with the group too. I think I do some independent Salesforce consulting, and I was working with a nonprofit, and we used the free app largely because they were just limited on budget, but the unsubscribe was a big gap. And for them, it caused a huge problem because, okay, it's great. We put a new donor into Salesforce that gets sent to MailChimp. Okay, that's all synced up. That's great. That's manual effort we don't have to worry about every week. But they had so many unsubscribes happening on the MailChimp side, and it wasn't getting sent back to Salesforce. And so they would then still be often communicating with these folks, even though they'd request to be taken off the list. And so even though they had the integration set up, they still had to deal with a lot of challenges around, okay, we've got to manually check these lists every week or so to keep it in sync. And it was just a huge administrative burden. So I think if Cazoomi is providing that, I think that's a really big win and definitely worth considering, like the extra investment, because it was such a huge headache for the client and sort of managing that process.
Yeah, if you're using that MailChimp app or some other form, your reports that you're running in Salesforce of emailable contacts versus what's in MailChimp will never match. The numbers will never be close to matching. With Cazoomi, you also have an option for soft bounces and hard bounces to map that value to fields in Salesforce as well. So you can see, was it hard bounced? Is it soft bouncing? So you can also pull that data into Salesforce as well. Any other general questions before I dig into actually page-by-page config?
I just want to say one thing that's come up for us a lot around licensing, right? So we sometimes have this departmental centric view of licensing, and they'll say, oh, this is free, or it's lower cost. And then we realize, oh, wait a minute, like how we would address, people used to build form assembly forms to update the unsubscribe and all this hack, so you'd put in all this time. And as you said, TJ, with exports and so forth, and you realize you're saving on licensing, but the total cost is just huge. And I think from what I've seen of Cazoomi, it's that nice middle ground where you're getting all this benefit of a kind of a predefined package that's really taking on the load. And one question Monica asked was, is Cazoomi similar to Zapier?
Yes, I should talk about the Zapier integration. One thing I do want to call out with licensing, the basic plan allows you to have 2 users. So you can have users to log in. So maybe someone internally and someone externally. And then as you upgrade, you can have unlimited number of team members. So if you have the basic plan, be prepared to possibly share logins for team members. On the Zapier front, so you can use Zapier on either of these two. Zapier is a lot more hands-on. You need a lot more of a technical skill to get this set up. Because unlike unlike Cazoomi, where it's all configured, you just go through screen by screen, your little wizard of, I want it to do this, I want it to do this, and then it just kind of runs in the background. Zapier, you have to build the zaps and tell it exactly what to do for every type of behavior. And so the initial setup for Zapier is going to take a significant amount of time, depending on what you want it to do. If a new contact comes in, if a contact is edited, you have to build in, all right, I want it to do these things. And each zap might be, 3 to 8 steps that you need to build. Keep in mind, Zapier pricing is based on the number of zaps per month. I believe it's with the nonprofit discount, they offer a 10% nonprofit discount. It's so I think it comes out to be about $17 a month these days with the discount. It's up to, I believe, 1,000 zaps. And a zap isn't a a submission. So one submission, depending on what you have it doing, could be 1 to 20. It's not a zap, tasks. It's based on tasks. So you might have a contact lookup. Does it exist? Okay, great. Add it to a campaign. So each of those steps are a task. So a single submission could have multiple tasks. So it's not 10,000 records being processed. It's how many steps of your Zap are there, and then times the number of records that you're processing. So Zapier is very robust and is probably the tool if you have non-standard needs around syncing. Like maybe you have data that needs to go to custom objects instead of contacts and campaign members or accounts. So then Zapier would be good because you can set exactly, what each step you want it to do of, oh, look up this record, update that record, create a record, that type of thing. Cazoomi it's easy to set up and it's fairly hard to break. Zapier, if you don't set it up properly, super easy to break, and may not be doing what you think it's doing. Zapier is amazing. We rely on it heavily, but very rarely is it the best tool to get Constant Contact or MailChimp connected. And orgs might be like, oh, we're already paying for Zapier, so is Cazoomi worth that additional cost? And usually it pays for itself that first year because of the amount of upfront work that needs to be done to build all of those initial Zaps.
And monitoring. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say Emily wrote a lot about this in the chat. With Zapier, then you own all the ongoing integration. All that technical debt is assumed, where it seems the Cazoomi model, you're outsourcing that and you're getting that bundled package, like you said. Emily writes quite a compelling case there on Zapier in the chat. So anyway, thanks.
And if you are dealing with consulting partners, I will say that if you have someone who's going to set up Cazoomi for you and they are estimating it more than 2 hours, if they know what they're doing, it should not take that long. If you have really complex segmenting, it might take up to 2 hours. Longer than that, something's funky. All right, let's dig in and see what it actually looks like on the back end. I thought about actually doing a live demo, but didn't want to possibly share login information for my clients, and also realized that live demos are great, but then the slide deck, you don't get to have anything for reference. So I went in and took screenshots of everything. And so this is specifically for MailChimp. I have a Cazoomi set up on my other screen. So if there's a Cazoomi specific question, I can log in and check, because for the most part, they're very similar, but MailChimp and Constant Contact, because they have different functionality and requirements, some of these configurations are slightly different. So when you log into Cazoomi, you get this screen with a dashboard. Each integration sync is called a setup. So you'll see I have 2 setups here, one to sync all contacts to a main list, and then one to do specific contacts to segmented tags. Couple things I want to call out on this screen. To set up your team members, you can go to My Team and set up additional team members. So if you're setting this up and then want to give access to a consultant, you go to My Team and set them up there. The Settings tab is super important because you can have Cazoomi send you an email every time a sync is completed, whether it's successful or not. You can have it only email you if something goes wrong, which is usually what I do, because with some tools, you can't trust that if you don't hear from them, everything is wonderful and good. Sometimes the sync will hang and you're never getting an email because there is no error. I have found that not to be the case with Cazoomi. So getting that email every single day, or if you're syncing multiple times a day, getting that email of like, hey, it's completed, can fill up your inbox really quickly. But you can have it send only when there's an error. You can tell it don't email me at all. So there's some great settings there around when to communicate with you. And then the pause, you can temporarily pause the syncs. So maybe you're doing something in the two systems. Maybe you're doing a mass dedupe, mass imports, mass delete, and you want to get everything all fixed on one side before you start, before it's talking to each other. So you can pause it temporarily. Maybe leadership comes and says, "Hey, we're gonna redo all of our segments, and we want to hold," and so you can pause that as well. And so we are going to come in here and edit one of our setups. So the first thing that you do is you need to name the setup and choose what it's going to do. So we chose Salesforce for MailChimp, and we're naming the list. I'll come back here. The basic plan can have up to 5 setups. So one might be Eventbrite and Constant Contact, one might be MailChimp. You might have multiple for MailChimp or Constant Contact doing different things. So you can have up to 5. So I highly suggest that you name them so at a glance it's very clear what they're doing. If you're using Cazoomi to set up 2 platforms that's not Salesforce, even though it has the little icons there of this is Salesforce to MailChimp, at a glance it can be helpful to name that in a standard format of this is Salesforce talking to something else. One thing I do want to highlight here is, so this particular org was set up before the NPSP functionality rolled out. So this looks like the NPSP functionality is not going to be included because it's not an NPSP Salesforce sync. The two are one and the same. So whether you choose the Salesforce to MailChimp or Salesforce to Constant Contact or the NPSP specific version of it, they are one and the same. It's just different ways for nonprofits to find their sync. So whether you choose one or the other, you will still have access to those 2 fields to configure. So don't worry if you think you choose the wrong one and you don't have to go back and redo it all over again. They'll still be there. So once you hit next there, the setup process is 6 steps. You set up Salesforce and log into Salesforce. You connect MailChimp, set up what you want it to do on the MailChimp side. You choose any add-ons. These days, now that they have reworked the plan options, if you have an old version of Cazoomi, step 3 will be full of different add-ons that you can choose and pay for. These days, it's pretty much the full sync. And I will talk about the full sync in a little bit when we get to that page, but the full sync is another paid add-on, and that one does not have a nonprofit discount. It's $9.99 per month, no matter what. And then you map specific fields, you do your segmenting, and schedule your syncs. All right, so we're going to go to step 1, Salesforce. First thing you need to do is connect to your Salesforce instance. I highly suggest you have a dedicated integration user license in Salesforce, and that you have that license set up as a with a permission set of password never expires. And the reason for that is because as Salesforce, every 3 months says, hey, you have to change your password, it will break any integration using that user because it can no longer access the system. So you'll have to go in every 3 months, change the user password, come in here, reconnect. Although these days it's using OAuth, which isn't as important, but it's good to have a dedicated integration user license. Best practice is to have 1 user per integration, but we all can't afford that. So having at least 1 user license, if possible, also having in that permission set of password never expires, also having an API only login. So the API only login really locks down that password never expiring user in that you can't access that user by going into the login.salesforce.com, that regular login screen. It can only talk to Salesforce via an API. However, some integrations, the ones that aren't as sophisticated and modern, still use that login screen process to get into Salesforce. So sometimes you have to leave that integration user not being an API only user. All right, so moving on. So connect to Salesforce. You do have the option to connect to a sandbox and play around and test. The next thing you want to do is, what do you want to sync? Contact, lead, or account? For the most part, it's going to be the contact. We're going to assume it's the contact in this process. The other thing I want to call out here is you'll notice on the right-hand side, there's a whole bunch of possible support articles for you to use. Cazoomi is great in providing a whole bunch of help texts, support articles, videos to help you through the process if you don't understand what each of these items are. Next, I forgot my arrows. So next thing you're going to do is, do you want to use a campaign or a list view sync? So this is members to Salesforce. You also have the option to use checkbox fields for group specific segmentation. We're going to, so if you choose campaign sync, there's a whole bunch of options. If you choose list sync, there's less options. But if you just leave it at without configuring, it is going to sync every single campaign and campaign member to your list and create tags or groups in there. So if you're using campaign sync, if you're using campaigns for newsletter or tags, I highly suggest that you either choose specific campaigns or criteria of an email type or a record type for only campaign members with a certain status, so that you're not pushing every single campaign member from Salesforce into MailChimp, only the ones that are relevant. And same thing on the list view side. So this is an all or nothing sync. Later on in step, 5, is when you can start doing the filtering of only the ones that meet this criteria, send over. The other option is checkboxes. If you use checkboxes, you'll set up the field mapping saying, this checkbox field goes to this group name. After that, you need to say, okay, metrics. I want Constant Contact or MailChimp's metrics brought into Salesforce. This used to be a big deal back in the day when we only got 1 gigabyte of data in Salesforce, that syncing any type of metrics would just blow up your storage and you'd have to pay for every half of gig worth of storage. It's not that big of a deal these days because I think everyone gets 10 gigs of storage now as nonprofits. So you have an option, if you want to see those stats in Salesforce, of it can create a campaign and campaign members. You can create activities, campaign and activities, add all of that as a contact, or just bring back the marketing metrics only. The marketing metrics only means it will create a campaign for every email that goes out and just have the total metrics of total opens, total clicks on that, but not specifics of this person received this email and opened or clicked this many times. Once you choose the type, you can limit it only to opens and clicks, just the bounces. The UR clicks puts that into a text field of a list of all of the URLs clicked. And if you're using one of the activity and campaign, it will attach the email as an attachment. So you have the option of using files instead of an attachment. We're going to choose create a Salesforce campaign. So you choose what type of campaign, record type, and the type that you want it to set up. And then you can say, only give me the clicks or bounce, opens and clicks, just give me the bounces, include the URLs clicked. So if you're choosing the campaign, what it's going to do is create a campaign in Salesforce for every single email that goes out. There's going to be new fields on the campaign to get the total number of opens and clicks. And then it is also going to create a campaign member record for every single person that got that email to connect the contact to that campaign. And that campaign member record will have new custom fields for opens, clicks, bounces, and if you choose to sync the URL clicks, that field to see the list of what URLs they did click on. When the first time you set that up, when you're done, you're very likely to get a pop-up that has this wonderful, amazing page with a link to the documentation of all of your options, what do they need, and also a video of setting it up. You are going to, it's not just setting these configurations. You're going to need to make sure all of the new fields that have been created are accessible to all of your staff via profiles or permission sets. You need to make sure they're on the page layouts where you want them. So to get those statistics back into Salesforce, there is the additional step that you have to go into Salesforce and make sure all those fields are there and visible to all of your staff. But Cazoomi is great about giving you all of the necessary help articles and videos to make sure you understand everything. So after you do that, there's going to be this little option for more options. Anytime you see that more options, click on it to make sure there's not something in there that you want to see. So within this more options, we have the option to say, you know what, I don't want to sync anything to the MailChimp audience. And that's going to make it a MailChimp to Salesforce one-way sync. Then you have, all right, what happens? So if you want to have dupes created, you can check that next box of I want to create a new record if an email address is updated in Salesforce instead of changing it and updating the record. And then here's the unsubscribe option. You have an option to not sync unsubscribes. And you also have the option if they are deleted in Salesforce, what do you want it to do in MailChimp? Do you want to remove them from that audience? Do you want to leave them in there? This nonprofit decided if we delete it in Salesforce, boot them out of MailChimp or the list that they're in. If you have any blank email address records in MailChimp, which happens a lot if you're trying, if you've been maintaining the two systems by themselves for a very long time, you very often just get a whole bunch of dirty data in MailChimp. So if you get any of those in MailChimp, it will delete those. If you have the need for multiple email addresses, you can select that and configure that. And then the namespace prefix in your Salesforce account, I have yet to see needed or understand why it would be used. So if anyone knows about that one, this is the one thing that I was like, I don't know, never seen it needed. Then you have the two NPSP needed fields of, check all the other emails so you don't create duplicates, and the option to create an organization record instead of an account. So for this one, this is if the individual has checked the if they enter data into the company field in MailChimp. So you used to have the option of creating a Rain, come on, work, an account or an household. So this one I have not used yet because the documentation says it will create a household account with the company for MailChimp as an affiliation. An org should not be created as a household account, so I think they may still need some work around the org affiliation, but it will create an affiliation with whatever's in the company, but I'm not 100% confident that it's creating the right type of account for that organization. And then MailChimp to Salesforce. If it does create a record, what do you want it to create? Do you want it to create a contact, a lead, an account? Again, you have an option to create a duplicate if that record already exists in Salesforce. I always check this next box of do not create new account if company's name cannot be found in Salesforce, because again, I do not fully trust that it is creating the correct type of account, but also if they're entering in their company name, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of duplicate org accounts in your system of, Bank of America, B of A, Bank of America, Inc., Bank of America, Inc., period. And most of the nonprofits that I have been working with Cazoomi don't use the company name fields in their various sign-up forms. but you have that option there. And then if you have records in MailChimp that are coming in just from a straight email sign up where they're just entering their email address, or maybe some imports where you just have email addresses, Salesforce requires a last name, not a first name, but it requires a last name to create a contact. So if MailChimp is trying to push records to Salesforce with no last name, it is going to error out. So those two boxes will use unknown for the first and last name when it comes in. And then internally, you can create an automation if you don't like unknown as someone's name. A lot of our orgs prefer it to be changed to friend for the first name and of the organization's name. So the full name looks like friend of organization. And then when you're sending emails internally, especially if you have automated thank you emails going out of Salesforce, it doesn't say dear unknown in that thank you email. It can say dear friend, thank you for doing whatever you did. So that is the end of step one, setting up the Salesforce side. You hit next, and you may get this pop-up saying, hey, if you've changed anything, don't forget to reset the sync process. If this is your very first time setting up your setup, you should be fine. But if you go in at any point and edit anything, always remember after you save, go back and reset the sync process, because what the sync is doing on that scheduled sync is only syncing records that have changed. So if you're changing criteria of what you're wanting the sync to do, you need to reset it to the next time it does its sync, or you force the sync. It's looking at all of the records to see if they now meet the criteria. Even though the record hasn't changed, your criteria, whether it's a segment, it's a filter criteria, that has changed. So it now might fall into different categories. So anytime you make a change on any of these pages, just remember after you hit save, reset your sync process. And at the end, I'll show you where to find that. On to step two. You connect to your MailChimp account and choose your main sync audience. So you hit refresh audiences, you can choose one of your audiences. If you have many audiences in MailChimp, just remember that if an email is in multiple audiences, you're double paying for them. So I highly suggest that you pare down your audiences to a single audience and use tags to categorize them so you're not overpaying for your plan. And then again, you have the option, do you want to sync all of your email campaigns? So all of the emails that you send, do you want to sync those back to Salesforce or only specific campaigns? If it's specific campaigns, you choose which ones. And again, you have the option of more options. Always click on that to see what's in there. If you have multiple group categories, you can check that. And Cazoomi is really good. You see the little bell symbol there is really good that if a step somewhere in the process is reliant on another configuration, it will tell you of, hey, if you want to use this, go back to the other step and configure it this way. So for segmentation method, you have the option of using tags, MailChimp groups, or GDPR. We are going to use tags throughout the process. There is a checkbox to remove records from the MailChimp audience when they no longer meet the segmentation criteria in step 1 or 5. So this is an amazing piece of functionality. It is an additional paid sync add-on for $9.99 a month. And a lot of the times that is worthwhile to orgs. So without this, the process is additive. So for newsletters, maybe this isn't a big deal, but when you start getting into more nuanced segmentation, especially around like, this is a donor, this is a lapsed donor, this is a non-donor, as they meet those criteria, they're going to get added to those groups or tags, but not removed from the list. So if they initially sign up to be a newsletter, they're going to be a non-donor. The first time they make and added to the non-donor tag. When they make their first donation, they're going to get added to the donor tag. Now they're in both lists. So the full sync will remove them from that non-donor tag once it no longer meets that criteria. And I'm just doing a time check, so I'm going to stop giving all the additional extra goodies. So you can set unsubscribe status, deleted records, archive. Once they get deleted, archived in MailChimp, they will stop syncing to Salesforce. So you can force it to do that. And then want to prevent MailChimp subscribers from syncing to Salesforce. This makes it a one-way sync from Salesforce to MailChimp if this one's checked. You hit the next button, and then you get the sync add-ons. Again, these days, if you have a modern plan, you really just have the option to do a full sync. A note about the full sync, if you are enabling the full sync on the scheduling tab, it needs to be scheduled a minimum of every 12 hours. So you can't do once a day if you're doing the full sync. The next is the field mapping page. So you can map fields from Salesforce to custom fields in MailChimp. So you would go to the sign up form in MailChimp for your list, create some fields, and then you would come in here and sync them. Note here, for every field that you set up, you have an option of one-way, Salesforce to MailChimp Constant Contact, email platform back to Salesforce, or a two-way sync. On this page, you can also see the pre-mapped fields for said tool. A note on this one, MailChimp only has email, first name, last name, email opt-out. Constant Contact also has address, phone, and account that are pre-built. If you want to override where these fields go, you do need the Pro plan or above, but you can, with the correct plan, override where you want the first name, last name, email, and opt-out. The next is filter and segmentation. You can segment in both directions of what you want from Salesforce to MailChimp, MailChimp, and back. There's an amazing video that kind of walks you through this process. We're going to choose Salesforce to MailChimp. One thing I do want to note here is the, again, there's amazing videos, but the date format. If you're using anything, any criteria of like the first gift date is greater than, or the last gift date is less than, make sure you use the right date format. It is not your standard date format, or even if you're used to building automation in Salesforce, it is the year, month, day. So make sure you format that correctly. Otherwise, you won't get an error, just nothing will sync properly. So you can have multiple filters set up based on checkboxes. You can have multiple criteria. So for instance, one org has a current donor and non-donor. And of course, the org that has those two filters does have full sync so that it pulls them out of those tags when they no longer meet the criteria. And then your scheduled sync. Do you want them to sync on specific days, every day, every 24 hours? You have an option to migrate based on a time or the sync campaign response. Oh, it syncs campaign activity for 30 days after the email is sent and then no longer syncs. And with that, you hit finish, you hit save. You then want to go into and view your setup again and reset that sync process right here. This page is great. So when you come and look at your sync process, you can see when was it last sync, were there any errors? You can then go into the details, view the errors. If for some reason you didn't get the email about errors with a direct link to the errors. You can also force a sync. Usually when I reset the sync process, I just force a sync after that. And you can also disable it, similar to pause, where it turns off for a while. And that is the end of the walkthrough. We do have just a few minutes left. Any questions?
A number have come in through the chat, TJ. I don't know if people want to speak to them, but there were a few good ones there. Lots of thank yous for the presentation, by the way, and how helpful it was. But there was a couple. One was, I don't know, Eileen, I think Constant Contact versus MailChimp. That was one. I don't know if you wanted to speak to that. And really, what kind of resources for making that decision. And I think Tanya shared one resource, but that was one question that came up.
So a lot of the times, the decision's chosen by budget. Of sometimes Constant Contact is significantly cheaper. MailChimp has a whole bunch of add-ons that if you're not ready for that fully expensive marketing automation tool, which is really the next step above MailChimp, MailChimp can be good if you're getting more sophisticated in your email needs, but can't afford or just don't have the internal resources to really deal with a full marketing automation tool. MailChimp is the way to go. I personally, in syncing and integrations, I'm not a big fan of Constant Contact because the functionality around lists and segmenting just isn't as nuanced as Constant Contact as MailChimp. But if you're not doing a lot of segmenting, if you don't need a lot of nuance of who you're communicating with, Constant Contact, if it's cheaper, can be the perfect solution.
Great. Thank you. And then Lizzie, I don't know, Lizzie, do you want to share your question? It was kind of about the NPSP specific setup.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, TJ, for the presentation. That was really, really informative. My question is, I am a Cazoomi user with a couple of my clients, and they're all set up with the regular Salesforce integration because, it's just been around for a while. So my question was, is there any reason not to move them to the NPSP specific, or are there any downsides? And would you? If
they have the old version, those NPSP, if they go in there to edit it, will show up. So
okay.
They are there, so you don't have to reset up the integration again. They just automatically show up. So if they are using the old version, you might want to suggest hey, we might want to do a pass because there's several new pieces of functionality that have been added that are just sitting there unconfigured. And those NPSP ones being two of them. So yeah, these days, if you have the old plan or the old setups of Cazoomi, it's a good idea just to walk through to do a quick refresh to see what is new that needs to be reconfigured.
Got it. So no need
automatically been added for you.
Awesome. So no need to migrate to the other setup, just review what we have in the current one. That's super helpful. Thank you.
TJ, I had a question sort of about data prerequisites, both on the Salesforce side and the MailChimp side. So I can envision a scenario where you have an empty MailChimp account, you have Salesforce, and you're going to work. That might be a fairly clean model. I suspect what we have is we have a comms group using MailChimp for many years with very partial data, I'd say, other than emails that they're managing. It is one audience and tags. And then we have our Salesforce database. So are the data prerequisites like making sure there's no dupes in that email field on the Salesforce side? And if they are kind of light on data on the MailChimp side, when you hit that match, is it best practice to push the first name, last name, for instance, from Salesforce? Or what are some considerations around kind of data prerequisites in those two databases that we're integrating?
So unless you're paying for the Pro plan and above, if pushing a records to MailChimp or Constant Contact, it's going to sync those pre-mapped fields, first name, last name, email, address, phone, account for you. You don't have a choice to sync those. So that's just going to happen. In general, before you do any type of integration, it's good to clean up your lists. However, with email duplicates, it's not going to create multiple. So if you have multiple contacts with the same email in Salesforce syncing to MailChimp, it's not going to create duplicates in MailChimp. MailChimp only lets that email exist per list one time. But if you're pushing statistics back and syncing fields, it's going to connect to one of them and campaign member one of them. So it's best to do as much cleaning as possible. If you have a MailChimp or Constant Contact account that has been kind of stale, or they have their very specific lists that they don't want syncing, you can always just create a new audience to push over and sync.
Right.
And if they're in the same, you'll double pay. But if you need to start syncing immediately, creating a new list and then later merging those can buy you some time and have that be a phased approach.
That's great. Thank you. And I know we're a little over. Sal, did you want to ask your question, or maybe that was addressed? I don't know, around formulas and.
No, missed a little bit of the presentation, but I was, I guess, curious follow up on the formula fields or even lookup values. So in part that it's not able to recognize kind of lookup fields. So we have to create a custom field and put the value of the lookup field. Is it the same thing in this integration?
Yes. So for instance, if you're wanting to push the name of the primary affiliation org from Salesforce to MailChimp or Constant Contact, you would create a formula looking up the primary affiliation's account name, because what it'll do, it'll push the ID to Salesforce, or to Constant Contact or MailChimp, which isn't useful. So you would create a formula looking up that record's name. And that's a good way to, because it only syncs fields on the contact record, if you have a related record that you want to pull down data from, either doing a DLRS, declarative lookup rollup summary, enhanced rollups, if it's NPSP opportunity-based, to put a value on the contact record, doing a formula to pull it down from a lookup fields, and then syncing those fields are the way to go. Oh, I did mention that when you do the activity syncing, fields are created. When you connect the two, if you choose that, Cazoomi will create those fields in Salesforce for you. So you don't have to create the new custom fields to capture all the opens, clicks, bounces, and all of that. It creates them for you, but you have to grant permission via profiles or permission set and add them to the page layout. So don't go and create a whole new set, because it creates them and will sync to its own fields.
So just to follow up, so with the full sync is a comprehensive sync versus a cumulative.
An additive. So yeah, the standard sync is just additive. If it meets the criteria, it adds it to the list, adds it to the group, adds it to the audience. The full sync says, this no longer meets this criteria. I am pulling it out of this group. So it will no longer receive these emails.
Okay, because my understanding is with the formula fields, it won't trigger the contact record to seem like it's been updated. So that's been a challenge for us sometimes. That the formula fields don't trigger like an update on the contact record.
Unlike Salesforce, where it is trigger based, the filters are, it runs the filter, finds if anything's changed, and then we'll add them. Okay. So if you're filtering specifically on those fields, the formula fields, I have not seen any issue, because it'll run it, has anything changed, and then do that. It's not looking to see if that field has changed. It's not a triggering event. It's a filter based, what is new and what didn't show up yesterday or the last sync.
So it's almost like evaluating to see who now is in the list. Okay, great.
Well, TJ, thank you so much. We kept you later, and everyone, thanks for jumping on. We maybe should do a part 2 to this. I don't know, TJ, we could discuss that. This was so helpful. Thank you very much. And Pearl, thank you so much for being able to capture this. If you're able to, that's wonderful. So thank you. Definitely. Yeah, and then I can
put my email in chat. If anyone has any questions as you start setting these up, just ping me. You don't have to sign on and become our clients. I want to make sure that you get your stuff configured properly. So if you're like, I don't know what this field does, should I enable this or not? Just shoot me an email, or find me on the Trailblazer community and send me a message. And I'm available, except next week. I'm out next week. But otherwise, shoot me an email and I'll see if I can walk you through the process or help you determine which is the correct tool for you to go with.
Well, TJ, thank you again. This was just great. And I don't know, I hope you saw in the chat just the thank yous as people had to jump off, and it was really useful. And I learned a ton. So thank you so much, not only for your contributions I see in the community where you're answering these questions, but for taking the time today to share all of this. Thank you. Thank you so much. And it was so nuanced in your understanding. There's so much depth there. It's really, really interesting and helpful.
And I'll shoot you a PDF of the slides, Dan, that you can share out. And I put in the notes of each of the slides. I copied and pasted some of the documentation about certain pieces of the functionality that I may not have gone into as nuanced as we stepped through. And also on the very first slide, have a link to the step-by-step to set up MailChimp. I can see if I can find the one for Constant Contact and add that link there as well. And I will share that with Dan that he can send out to the group.
Incredible. Well, thank you again. And Pearl, thank you for stepping up.
Yes, thank you, Pearl.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for being there today and participating. Thanks everyone. Cheers. Have a great weekend. TJ, thanks again. Goodbye.
Enjoy your long weekend.
Yes, the 3-day. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.